Welcome to another Legacy Warriors podcast where we break down the top two feeder leagues to the UFC. Obviously, there's Cage Warriors, which is having a double header of events next weekend, which I'll be breaking down both of those for you guys. But this week, we're focusing on LFA as they have their LFA 211 event going down this weekend, which is headlined by a women's bantamweight matchup for the title between two 4-0 prospects. First, you got Bia Mesquita, who is probably one of the best women's BJJ practitioners of all time. She's obviously stepping foot in the MMA cage and trying to make the most of her athletic prime while she can. And then she's going up against Canadian 4-0 Sierra Dinwoodie, who's very physical, tall, and strong for this division. So it'll be interesting to see how that matchup plays out. We also have a co-main event between former CFFC champion Fumi Nkuta, who's going up against former LFA champion Cody Davis. So very intriguing grappling matchup there. Very interested to see how that one actually pans out. Just off rip here, I know I get a lot of comments in the comment section in regard to people asking, what's your favorite play? Or what are your most confident plays? Now, I do these breakdowns to give you guys an idea of what I'm thinking about for every single matchup. And it obviously takes up a lot of time, as does when I do my written breakdowns on the Lock of the Night Patreon page. But I also drop a final plays and predictions post on the Patreon for every single event, which lets you know what spots I'm tracking and which spots I'm confident in as well. So I hate replying in the comment section. I did it last week for the PFL card where I told somebody, hey, I feel good about Jesus Pinedo, and I think it was Movlid Haibulayev who I told him that I'm jumping on. And I kind of did that just more so, I don't know, I just felt like doing it. But normally I don't reply to those types of comments because that's what the Patreon page is for. I put in a ton of work to do these breakdowns, and the least you guys can do is either watch the breakdowns and try to figure out which spots that I'm on, or just check out the Patreon page and just get the answers right away. So, and I also opened up a new way of kind of checking out the final plays and predictions post. You don't have to sign up for the month. You can just purchase the post itself. So you just get the post as well as all the plays that are on that post. And you can do that for every event, or just save a ton of money and hop on the Patreon page on a monthly basis, which is still very cheap, anywhere between $5 and $15 a month. Super cheap, especially if you're wagering on the majority of these cards. All right, now with that out of the way, we got 11 fights scheduled for this LFA 211 card, which I believe is going down in Salamanca, New York. Probably butchering it. Salamanca, Samalanca. I don't know what it is, but it's going down in New York. And we obviously have our usual suspects that show up on these LFA cards. Canadians, obviously, as well. Sierra Dinwoodie in the main event. But yeah, I'm going to go through this pretty briefly. Not a great card from a betting perspective overall. I think there will be some very live underdogs, which you guys might be able to decipher with the breakdowns I'm throwing at you just now. But again, not a great card from a betting perspective. All right, let's get right into it. First matchup up, Elton Dedaj coming in at minus 215, going up against Zaki Mohsin, who comes in at plus 175. I think Dedaj is the better striker here, is a little bit more technical, should be able to see most of the big shots coming back his way from Mohsin. Mohsin obviously has that nuclear option. This guy has a ton of knockout power, but I think he's going to struggle to land that here against Dedaj, who should be able to touch him up from distance, maybe mix in a few takedowns where Mohsin has struggled in the past, and I think that's where we see Dedaj really start to pull away with this matchup. But with the lack of tape on either guy, I don't feel super comfortable jumping on that minus 215 line for Dedaj unless he drops closer to about that minus 150 line. Next up, we got Derek Patterson coming in at plus 375, going up against Sofiane Kabil, who comes in at minus 500. Kabil normally relies on a grapple-heavy approach through his amateur run, but in his pro debut, which was also under the LFA lights last time, he utilized a ton of pressure and power striking to hurt his opponents and just keep them on the defensive, and he ended up winning that fight on the scorecards. I expect him to utilize a similar approach, but actually lean more so on his grappling to try to get Patterson onto the ground, where Patterson can't utilize his lanky and distance striking type of approach that got him a win back in October under the LFA lights as well. Kabil honestly is probably the one of, if not the only chalky favorite that I would trust on this card. I feel like he can go out there and just establish his game very effectively here and either find that finish or grind this out. But I really like Kabil to win this fight. All right, next up, we got Kevin Carrier coming in at minus 260 going up against Dave McIntosh, who comes in at plus 200. This one has me scratching my head. I don't think Carrier is that great of a fighter. He's a decent regional fighter, but we saw last time around he came up short as a minus 350 favorite against Kyle Pufol in a fight where he was only able to win one of the 3 rounds. Pufol was able to keep him on his back foot, throwing big shots and hurting Carrier on numerous occasions, and I think Carrier is more comfortable taking fights to the ground and looking for submissions or domination from there. However, I think he's going to struggle to do that here against McIntosh, who's been training with some decent guys, training under Gilbert Smith at Victory MMA, the father of UFC fighter Elijah Smith, but also training in Arkansas alongside guys like TJ Brown and Luis Pena. Decent striking, decent ground game, and kind of surprised he's at plus 200 here. I don't know if this is supposed to be a layup spot for Carrier, but there's nothing Carrier does that really instills too much confidence, and I wouldn't be surprised to see McIntosh actually pull off the upset here. I know he's not beaten the greatest competition on the pro scene. He's had some decent wins on the regional scene, the amateur scene, and all of his losses are against guys with an undefeated record, if I'm not mistaken. With the exception of one guy who ended up taking an L later on in his career, but he's come up short against some decent competition, so I wouldn't categorize Carrier in that realm. Thus, I'm going to take McIntosh to win this fight. There's nothing Carrier has ever done to make me believe he's worthy of being a chalky favorite, and McIntosh doesn't seem like a complete tomato can either, so I'm willing to take the plunge on the dog here to pull off the upset. All right, next up, we got Jake Woodley coming in at minus 500 going up against David Gladfelter, who comes in at plus 375. Now, Woodley is a high-level D1 wrestler who suffered the first loss of his career last time around as a minus 400 favorite. His opponent showed him no respect immediately, throwing a ton of big shots until Woodley eventually landed a takedown, but Woodley was unable to settle for a top position, which allowed his opponent to sink in a Darce choke and quickly get the tap there soon thereafter. And that's where it seems Woodley is really starting to struggle. He has some good top pressure, some good ground and pound, but his BJJ game still has a lot of question marks. And he's going up against a guy that has a pretty aggressive BJJ game here in David Gladfelter. This is a guy that actually has a submission victory over Dylan Budka from earlier in his career, and 5 of his 6 pro wins have been by submission. He's currently riding a 3-fight winning streak and showcases a slick BJJ game every time out. And this is one of those spots where if Woodley's still not too comfortable playing on the ground with a BJJ practitioner, he could find himself getting caught in something again. I'm going to lean with Woodley as my prediction in this matchup because I think his wrestling is good enough to actually thwart whatever Gladfelter throws at him. But at a minus 500 clip, it's hard not to want to take a little bit of a shot on Gladfelter, considering he has the type of style that would cause Woodley some problems. So prediction is Woodley, but I wouldn't mind a little bit of a sprinkle on Gladfelter or Felter considering his BJJ acumen. All right, next up, we got Farman Hassanov coming in at minus 900, going up against Mark Ari Lewis, who comes in at plus 600. Now, Lewis pulled off an upset last time around against a guy that was much smaller than him and seemed to gas himself up after the first round, allowing Lewis to cruise to a decision victory. But Hassanov will be very difficult to do that against, considering his athleticism, explosiveness, and power that he brings to the table, and I think he'll be able to squash Lewis within 2 rounds here. I think Hassanov at minus 900 is kind of hard to really get behind and be like, hey, you should be parlaying this, because I normally don't like parlaying anything past that minus 700 line to begin with, but I expect Hassanov to go out there and really run through Lewis, land his big shots, showcase his speed advantage, and not to mention all the improvements that he's been making under their American Top Team banner, which I think will help him reach his full potential, which in my opinion, if things go well, and he continues to progress at a serious rate, this guy is worthy of being a ranked UFC fighter if he continues to put his game together. And I think he'll showcase that here by squishing Mark Ari Lewis in the first or second round. All right, we got LFA newcomers here, and Lucas Seibert, who comes in at minus 625, going up against Gustavo Kruger, who comes in at plus 450. Seibert is a standout collegiate wrestler, but also a BJJ purple belt, and it's obvious that's what he likes to lean on when he gets into his fights. He went 5-0 as a pro or amateur and is now 4-0 as a pro, and it makes no bones about it. He wants to get opponents to the ground almost immediately and then look to find that submission quickly thereafter, or even a TKO spot. He's going up against Kruger, who makes his LFA debut this weekend as well, but it's been close to 7 years since he's competed in mixed martial arts. He fought twice in 2013, once in 2015, and once in 2018, but he's gone up against very low-level competition, guys that don't even have Tapology pages. If I'm, it's just not a good look at all. Seibert should be able to dominate this with his wrestling. I'm curious, as Kruger has been training throughout the last several years, training with a good group of guys there at the Culture Club as well, even mixing it up at Plinio Cruz's gym in Connecticut. But based on everything that I've seen on tape thus far, this seems like a spot that Seibert should be able to go out there, grind this fight out. But a lot of question marks on the Kruger side of things, which is why I'll have to suggest passing on this fight. But I'm going to go Seibert, and Seibert by decision. By the way, props. There's never props for these LFA fights, so it's either totals or just straight up money lines. All right, next up, Adam Livingston coming in at minus 300, going up against Hugo Oyarzun, who comes in at plus 240. Now, Hugo actually came in on short notice in a main event slot against Richie Lewis back in December and actually won one of the rounds on 2 judges' scorecards, utilizing his physicality and his grappling to keep Miranda on his back. He seems like a decent all-around fighter and a guy that could potentially be Adam Livingston's toughest test to date. I'm kind of surprised that Hugo finds himself nearly as a plus 250 underdog, as I think he will be a guy that will have a lot of success if he looks to take Livingston to the ground. Livingston is a guy that normally relies on his striking approach, darting in and out of distance and really looking to pick his opponents apart with straight shots. In his last matchup, he got taken down a few times by a mediocre fighter, but he was able to quickly work back to his feet and then eventually find that knockout. But it might be harder for him to do that against a more physical fighter here like Oyarzun. And I have to lean with I believe he's Peruvian, the Hugo side of things here, because I think his physicality will cause Livingston a ton of trouble. He has a tougher strength of schedule, obviously showcased some good things in his last matchup against Richie Miranda. And if he can keep Livingston on his back, this is a very winnable fight. So at plus 240, it's hard to pass this spot up. So I'm going to go Hugo, and Hugo by decision over 2.5. Next up, we got Jacoby Jones coming in at minus 270, going up against Shovkal Churchaev, who comes in at plus 210. There seems to be some heat behind this matchup after that weigh-in that we saw with both these guys chirping at each other. But I'm kind of surprised Churchaev came out as successful as he did last time around in his LFA debut back in January. He was able to utilize a lot of distance striking, mix in a lot of flashy techniques as well, and then lean on his grappling late as it was clear that he was starting to slow down. And that seems to be his issue. He throws a lot early from distance, but then he starts to slow down, especially with him backpedaling for the majority of fights. I expect Jacoby Jones to keep him on his back foot, continuously crash the pocket with big shots, and I think that could eventually lead to a spot where Jones ends up finding the chin of Churchaev and putting him out that way. The under 2.5 at plus money here is hard to pass up. Like I said, especially with the heat that they had at the weigh-ins, I could see this spilling over into the matchup with one of these guys making a mistake, and I think it's going to end up being Churchaev who leaves his chin open and allows Jones to clip him and put him away. At minus 270, though, I still have some question marks about Jones, as I think he was a guy that was being shoved down our throats a little bit too much, and we saw him get exposed by guys like Daniel James Allen, and then obviously when he lost his title to Keegan Genrich. But I think that this is a very winnable fight for him. I just want to take the chalk on him. All right, next up, we got Gigi Canuto coming in at minus 2,500, going up against Flor Hernandez, who comes in at plus 1,200. No need to go too deep into this one, other than the fact that the over 1.5 at even money is really intriguing me. Hernandez has never been defeated, although she's still very early in her career. She might be able to put up a little bit of resistance here against Canuto, but I think it's just a matter of time before the BJJ black belt is able to get this fight to the ground, and I think she can eventually work to a finishing spot, but it might cause her to go over that 1.5 round mark. Obviously, you can parlay her at minus 2,500, but I might consider a little bit of a sprinkle on the over 1.5. Otherwise, I don't mind passing here, but I expect Canuto to come up with a late finish over Hernandez. All right, co-main event now between former CFFC champion Fumi Nkuta, who comes in at minus 350, going up against former LFA champion Cody Davis. This is a fun fight and a bit of a regional super fight, if you want to put it that way, considering both these guys were former champions. But I think that Nkuta is the better scrambler here, and that would definitely be the difference maker. Davis is very good with wrestling and top control, but he hasn't fought somebody, well, actually he has fought somebody like Nkuta who can keep him from that top position. Guys like Mark Climaco and even Eduardo Chapulin, who ended up defeating Davis for his LFA title a couple years, or I believe November of 2023. But I think that this is a very winnable fight for Nkuta. Tough to trust him fully at minus 350, as he can be taken down and he can be controlled in certain spots. But I think he'll be active enough and very good in terms of just being very immediate with his scrambling, finding reversals, looking for that top position, and showcasing that he has the better gas tank here against Davis. I'm going to go Nkuta by decision, but I'd be wary about parlaying him in this spot against a tank and motor like Cody Davis. All right, that brings us to the main event now, which is for the LFA women's bantamweight title, as we got Sierra Dinwoodie coming in at plus 285, going up against Beatrice Mesquita, who comes in at minus 360. Now, Dinwoodie is a tall, lanky, physical fighter who has often utilized that physicality to bully her opponents on the ground and smash them from that top position. She's found herself in some bad spots against certain fighters, but luckily she's been the stronger of them, and she's been able to work out of those bad spots and get back to laying the smackdown from that top position. Her striking is not all that bad, but there are some shortcomings in her technical game, which will ultimately give her issues when she fights more technically sound fighters. And unfortunately for her, she's fighting that this weekend in Beatrice Mesquita, who is a very high-level BJJ black belt and probably one of the most credentialed women's BJJ players of all time. She's 34 years old, so time is really not on her side if she hopes to make it to the next level, and it's obvious that the LFA is trying to push her as soon as possible. She made her pro debut in June of last year for a different promotion, joined the LFA in October, and now enters her fourth fight with the promotion in just 8 months. It's safe to say that if she ends up getting the submission here in the finish, maybe the LFA and Ed Suarez can whisper into the ears of the UFC matchmakers and either give her a Contender Series matchup or even consider her as a potential short notice replacement should a spot open up for her. And I think that's going to end up coming true here. But my issue is if she's unable to get those dominant positions, maybe Dinwoodie's physicality comes into play here and she's able to fend off Mesquita's attacks and then just batter her on the feet, where it's clear Mesquita still has a lot of trouble. I think Mesquita does a good enough job in terms of transitioning from her takedown attempts to taking the back of her opponents, and that's where I think we're going to see Dinwoodie a little bit too slow to react to those things, and I think within 2 rounds we'll see Mesquita take the back of Dinwoodie and eventually find that submission. Again, minus 360 is a little bit wide for me to get behind, but the under 3.5 currently sits around that minus 180 range, which I think is more than playable here, especially if you're taking Mesquita to win. If you think she wins, and if you think she's going to look minus 360, and more than likely looks with her getting that submission within the first 2 or 3 rounds. And that's what I'm going to be banking on here with Mesquita and new LFA bantamweight champion, and maybe a Contender Series spot later on this year. There you guys go. 11 fights broken down for you guys for LFA 211. This card goes down Friday night, just alongside PFL as well, which I've already dropped a breakdown for just yesterday. So make sure you guys tune in for that if that's what you're looking for. Again, I got my track plays all on the Patreon page as well. So if you guys want to check that out, check the link in the description below. Otherwise, I will see you guys tomorrow for the Locky 2-Step / Locky Trinity free parlay segment, as well as the prop drop. See you guys then. Peace.